In part one with legendary drummer Gary Malibur, we discussed his influences and his education at becoming a drummer. We talked about his band Raven and jamming with Jimi Hendrix. And then we talked about the band opening up for Led Zeppelin, Grand Funk Railroad, and others in 1969. Shortly thereafter, the band broke up and Gary was on a quest in search of Van Morrison. In part two, we discuss how Gary met Van and the making of the Moondance album. We get into the details of the tracks and much more.
And I said, and I met Jeff Labes, the piano player, and I said, do you mind if I come in with my kit? And I sit in.
Really?
And 3 months later, we made Moondance.
Yeah, well, I got some questions before that.
Okay, go ahead.
So what I read was that Van Morrison moved to the Woodstock area because Bob Dylan was living there, and he felt that the only person worthy of hearing his ideas was Bob Dylan, so he kept driving by his house. And then he moved away, and then he was like, and then I guess that's when you saw him in New York City. Is that correct?
Well, some of that is correct. I was there after that. I know Van was living in Woodstock because during those years, it was Bob Dylan, it was John Sebastian, it was the guys in the band that wound up making music for Big Pink. They came out of Toronto. They were backing up Bob Dylan. It was Bob Dylan. It was Bob Dylan's lawyer and manager and an assembly of all of those people. They were occupying actually Woodstock. The actual Woodstock was 60 miles down the road, but they were occupying the Woodstock that we know as being Woodstock, with Ohio Mountain and all of that area up there. And Van was living up there with Janet, and they had a place up there. And Janet is definitely the brown-eyed girl because she's Janet Rigby from California, Fairfax, California. And then they wound up moving back and took me with them. And I wound up living in Van's studio out in California when he moved out of there and went back. And then we did Tupelo Honey. But back to Moondance. We did assemble that band, and that's exactly how it happened. And from that point on, we were actually rehearsing some of the songs in Moondance while Woodstock was going on. So, and that 3 months later, it was wintertime in 1969 in Manhattan at A&R Studios on 6th and 46th Street. And that was a glorious 10 days of recording that. We didn't know at the time Moondance was going to do what it was going to do.
Yeah, right.
Every moment of that record I have completely embedded in my head.
Yeah, I'd like to hear more about it. So, I mean, what did you think as you were recording? Did Van have an idea of what he wanted, or what? How did that whole concept come?
Okay. I'm telling you that Van Morrison was at his best. He was totally open to all the guys in the band, and he was totally open to what every man was playing. And he was absolutely gracious to everyone. It was a golden time. That's what I remember. And we would do a track, and we'd go in and we'd listen, we go, oh, let's do another one. But we really, if people don't realize this about Van, but those vocals aren't overdubbed. Those vocals are real at the time. So what you're really hearing is the real vocal. There's no, hey, let's do it again, or let me sing it 25 more times until no, that did not take place. Those were actual takes. What he did allow was anybody that had a suggestion after we picked the track. We said, that one's better, let's go with this one. He allowed free additions. I would go up to Van and say, Van, I hear a percussion part, can I put that on? Or, yep, absolutely, sure, go right ahead, no problem. It was that gracious. For instance, on the slow, soulful song called Crazy Love, when we did that, and we found the temperament of each song. Each song on that album had its own temperament. And, you know, the guys were that good to find exactly that temperament. And I said, look, Van, I'm going to play brushes on this song very soft, and let's just do it in that R&B style. And then we finished it, and over in the corner of the room was left over a set of vibraphones from the night before from SIR rehearsal, rental. And I said, Van, would you let me put the vibraphone part on on Crazy Love. And he said, absolutely, sure, go right ahead. So we did. So by the time it got around to mixing, they all wanted to go back up to Woodstock. And I asked, Elliot Shiner was the main engineer on that album. And I said, Elliot, do you mind if I stay here for the weekend? I don't want to go. I wanted to stay. And he said, yeah, why don't you do that? Help me mix this record. I said, okay, can I sleep on the couch? He said, yeah, but don't tell anybody you're going to be here. So we actually went at starting to mix Moondance. And Elliot did a beautiful job, and I was there, and I had a chance to do that.
That's just great. I mean, there's so many great songs. It's a landmark album. So, I mean, back to the other question I had, though, the concept. Did he have an idea when he went in? Or did he have songs already in mind?
He didn't have the whole concept of the record. He had individual songs, and we had done some rehearsing prior to them for the horns, for Jack and Colin. And they wrote those parts in some of the rehearsals we had. We didn't have many rehearsals, but by the time we got there, we had some of it pretty well in hand of what we were doing. And we just went after takes, and we adjusted tempos, and we just followed Van and listened to him. And then basically the choices were made due to the vocal. Luckily, we played the right stuff at that time. Luckily.
And Van, I mean, he plays almost so many instruments. Was anybody intimidated when he came in? You know, because knowing that he can play drums, he can play saxophone, he can play guitar.
I would have paid to have been there. Let me put it that way, because I knew what was going to happen. I really did. And then when you're hearing him sing, and we're doing Into the Mystic, you're going, oh God,
I love it.
Here we go. Finally, let me cut forward. I got that same feeling working with Miller. I got that same feeling working with Eddie Money. And then I finally got to work with Springsteen, and the same hairs on my arm were going, uh-oh. Bruce's his whole team, that's a whole nother chapter. That's a whole nother story, because just to have been invited on board. But Bruce was, and John Landau, and Toby Scott and Chuck Plotkin, they were well aware of my work at that time. And that was a special time in his life too. So let's be accurate, because I want to make sure that's accurate, so we tell the right story.
Right, sure. So back to Moondance. Did you guys already have an idea that was going to be a hit? I mean, because no. I know when I read some things about what Van had said about it, it was a different album altogether. It was a different concept.
Well, here we are, more than 45 years later. For those of people that are aware of that album and know it, and I'm hoping the people out there that are interested are listening to it. Here we are, more than 45 years later, and they still haven't properly categorized what the hell that record was. It wasn't. I mean, let's figure out what it wasn't. It wasn't a folk album. It wasn't really a rock and roll album. Really? You think so? I don't think so. I mean, try to put it somewhere. Yeah, I haven't been able to. I mean, Moondance itself was. I mean, we realized when we were playing it. I said, look, there's only one way to play this, and I'm going to have to play a bebop swing beat, and that's what the tune is. And here we go, gentlemen. That's what we're going to do. In spite of where the world was rhythmically at the time, that was completely against the grain.
45 years later, it's still a hit.
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested enough in it, take each song and break it down. And you go, well, where does this one belong rhythmically? So once again, we're back to that, how do we define rock and roll thing, which is arguable. Here it is almost 70 years later, and I don't think we've yet agreed on a definition of that term. So I can't really say rock and roll and mean any of it anymore, because there's too many variations. You're not going to compare Metallica with Chuck Berry.
Right.
That's a whole nother way of playing.
What did Van think the album's structure was? Where did he think it landed?
It was never discussed. We just went from song to song. As a matter of fact, there's one song that we cut, which was almost like a Latin rock song called I Shall Sing, which was left off of Moondance. I don't know why. It sounds just like the band that we did. And who wound up covering it was Art Garfunkel,
Okay.
and he did his version, which was exactly a carbon copy of ours. And I'm going, oh, okay, but we had that version. How come it was left off of Moondance? I still haven't figured that one out yet. How did that happen? You know.
Well, what are your favorite tracks off of that album? I mean, there's
Oh.
so many.
That's one of those albums. I have to say every one of them, but there's a couple that are special. You know, Moondance did what it did. You know, I mean, I know for a fact that even the Buddy Rich Big Band did a version of Moondance. So that has connective tissue, and I thought it would have connective tissue back to that era, and maybe forward. Crazy Love has just become one of the R&B beautiful songs of the world. Into the Mystic. I mean, look, what do you do with someone who wrote? What do you do with a guy? Let me just put you out there with this one. What do you do with a guy who wrote Gloria and then turns around and writes Into the Mystic? Now, what do you do with that? But what I was going to say is, after that, we did tour with the Moondance band, all the people from that, and it was. I wish we would have just stayed together and kept going, but you know, everybody splintered off because they were all living their lives in different levels. And eventually Van moved out of there and then went back to California, and I went along with him. Then we made Tupelo Honey and St. Dominic's Preview and Beautiful Vision. And that was when I was up in the San Francisco area with him. And it was quite a time. But what happened from that one album for me, that one album became my key to the city of Los Angeles. And all of a sudden producers were calling me up and wanting me to come down to LA and record. So that album was absolutely a golden pass that just sent me off into the stratosphere.